Jacob dodged away and grabbed her dainty hand when Sophie tried to punch him. Surprisingly, Sophie had another strike waiting for him. She formed a fist with her other hand and aimed it at Jacob's stomach and punched him hard. She pulled her arm back and looked at Jacob menacingly. There was a knock at the door right at that moment, and both of them straightened themselves.
Come in,
Sophie called. Draykon pushed open the door and entered. How's the tutoring going? He asked as he walked over to Jacob. Jacob said as he rubbed his aching stomach.
It's going pretty well, sir.
Sophie's face turned red. Draykon nodded. Jacob, Sophie's English grammar is very poor. We wanted to find her a tutor, but she wouldn't agree. That's why we asked you to help her study.
Yeah, she's working pretty hard,
Jacob said. Sophie looked at Jacob in surprise. She didn't think he would say something nice about her. My daughter here is very convincing. She's actually smart, but she just doesn't work hard. Draykon patted Sophie's head.
Daddy.
Sophie looked at her shoes in embarrassment. Draykon looked at Jacob and said, How's your cultivating going? Did the spirit concentration scroll from Elder Liam work for you? Nothing seems to be happening, Jacob replied. Take your time. He put his hand on Jacob's shoulder, then said, Come with me. He led Jacob to the attic on the top floor. Sophie was curious and followed them. This is Sophie's mother's studio at home, but she normally doesn't use it at night. After you finish tutoring Sophie, you can come here to cultivate, Draykon said. Jacob looked around. The studio was small, but it was also elegantly decorated that it didn't feel cramped at all. Jacob noticed a triangular bookcase with all kinds of books about design. On the other side of the room, there was a flat table on which a variety of drawing equipment was kept for drafting. The chair was as green as spring grass, and it added an artistic ambiance to the tiny attic. Through the small window, one could view the backyard. It was filled with vivid green plants and looked very pleasing to the eye. Draykon noticed Sophie pouting and asked, What is it, darling?
Daddy, do you like Jacob more than me? I'm not even allowed to enter this studio. Why is it that he can cultivate here?
Sophie had a sour look on her face. How about you do your homework here, and he gets to cultivate in your bedroom? Draykon asked her.
No way,
said Sophie immediately. That's what I thought. Now go do your homework. Draykon meant business. Sophie left unwillingly. Draykon looked at Jacob and immediately began explaining the cultivation technique. There are actually 3 levels in the spirit concentration scroll. The first level is to communicate with heaven and earth, feel the energy in nature, and purify your body at the same time. The second level is to guide the energy into your body. This process is very slow, but it really helps strengthen your body. The third level is to release the energy around your body. You can only cultivate other more formal cultivation techniques after passing the third level. Jacob looked at Draykon as he listened to him carefully, trying to memorize what he was saying. He finally understood that Draykon wanted to guide him with the cultivation himself, and wasn't leaving it up to Sophie. The first level of communicating with heaven and earth also has some techniques to it. Draykon faced Jacob and explained clearly and slowly. Jacob was touched because Draykon was taking time out of his busy schedule to explain these terms to him. However, if the elders saw that the Dragon King was himself explaining these basic terms to Jacob, they would find this incredibly shocking. However, Jacob was utterly oblivious to details of Draykon's identity, barring the fact that he was a king. Jacob had no idea what the duties and powers his role entailed, or how revered and feared Draykon was. Draykon's coaching was easy to understand, and Jacob learned a lot from him. Some things that he couldn't comprehend before became easier to understand. They would have been very difficult for Jacob to figure out all on his own. Jacob understood that Sophie would encounter a considerable amount of danger over the next few years, and within these years, he also had to undertake the same amount of danger to save her life. Swallowing the internal core was a dangerous act. If he didn't follow through the Dragon Clan's cultivation technique to mediate and suppress the energy of the internal core, his body would explode sooner or later due to the growing power of the Dragon Core. Jacob now was more eager to cultivate than ever. According to Draykon, the Dragon Core innately contained the instinct of absorbing the heavenly and earthly spiritual energy. Therefore, it was also a supreme treasure of the world. A dragon's body was innately born with a dragon core. It was due to the core that the dragons could become so strong and powerful. As Draykon taught Jacob the cultivation technique, the time passed quickly. Soon, it was 9:30 in the evening.
Sir, I should go back now. Our dorm's curfew is 10 o'clock.
Jacob noticed the clock ticking. All right, I still have half of the technique left to explain, but we could talk about it tomorrow. Draykon led Jacob out of the studio.
All right, I'll come see you tomorrow then,
said Jacob. I'll drive you back, Draykon said in an indisputable tone. Jacob wanted to refuse at first, but he nodded because he thought Draykon had more to say to him. Helen and Jacob had already established an amicable relationship, but it was about time that he got to know his future father-in-law as well. They stepped out of the house and Draykon pulled a black vintage car from the garage. Jacob got in the car silently. As the car engine started, he waited for Draykon to begin talking. However, Draykon focused on driving the car and didn't say anything. Jacob had many questions, but somehow he couldn't muster up the courage to ask him anything. Draykon and Jacob arrived at the dorm entrance with 15 minutes to spare. Draykon was clearly familiar with the campus roads, and Jacob suddenly remembered that Draykon's group of companies in the mortal world were the biggest investors in his university. Draykon's firm donated heavily and was responsible for building the stadium, the library, and the new media building. Jacob kept getting more impressed with every minute in Draykon's presence. Come again at the same time tomorrow. Join us for dinner and tutor Sophie, Draykon said after he parked at the entrance of the dorm.
Okay, thank you, sir,
Jacob said as he got out of the car. Draykon nodded and drove away. Jacob dragged his feet to his dorm. He was tired, and as soon as he reached his floor, Sam and the others surrounded him.
Hey man, since when do you get round-trip services and fancy cars? Are you dating a rich girl? I'm not dating anyone. I just finished tutoring someone, and her dad drove me back.
He tried to stay as honest as he could. Jacob felt squeamish, but reasoned with himself.
It's better to tell half the truth than to tell a whole lie. How come I never meet a rich girl? Not just rich, pretty too.
Sam seemed to be talking more to himself. Jacob climbed up to his bed as Sam and the others babbled on about women.
Jacob's fortune seemed to be smiling down on him. A lot of women have been giving him attention this year. First, a cute girl comes to meet him on campus. Then the prettiest teacher in college, Susan, calls him to her office. And even the class president, Kathy, is crushing on him.
Jacob didn't want the conversation to continue, so he began pretending to read. But actually, he was trying to adjust his state of mind. He was feeling enlightened after learning the cultivation technique, and was eager to try it out. Jacob began following Draykon's instructions and went deep into his concentration. He maintained the meditative state for a while and let the weak energy flow through his various acupoints in his body. The energy kept flowing from his head to toes and back until it finally reached the center of his body. The energy reached his abdomen, where his internal dragon core was situated. As soon as the energy hit the internal core, the core began to vibrate, and the vibration could be felt through his body. The vibrations flowed in a faster, more easier way now, like the pathways were cleared for it to flow. Jacob felt an internal knock on his forehead, and his body's vibrations seemed to be taking in the external energy. He felt strengthened as the heavenly and earthly spiritual energy flowed inside him. It kept flowing for a few minutes, and then stopped for a few seconds. The energy then began to get distributed to the hundreds of acupoints in his body. His whole body suddenly became light. He felt illuminated as the heavenly and earthly spiritual energy that was difficult for him to sense earlier was finally filling up his body. It felt as if his body became a transparent sieve. He couldn't keep the energy, but was also not an obstacle to it. It felt like he was rising higher and higher to an inextinguishable power. The feeling of clarity that came from his power was way more refreshing than swallowing 100 peppermints. Jacob tried to enjoy this refreshing experience. He didn't expect the breakthrough of the Spirit Concentration Scroll's first level would be this easy.